Start at 1:30. Today I want to talk about something that is difficult for me to talk about. So I'm going to try to approach it first from a D&D viewpoint and then try to see how it relates to me personally, because I've been thinking a lot about this and I've been feeling a lot about this, and that is fear. So I named the channel The Anxious DM, and I've been having a lot of thoughts lately about why do I feel anxious so often. Um, Let me give you an example. So, in our game that we were playing, the Dungeon Crawl, we had a session just barely that was a pretty intense session. There was a lot of things that happened. I ended up one shot unconsciousing, if that's a word, unconscionizing one of my players. Um, I sent a really tough creature to go down into the dungeon. Well, to essentially find them in the dungeon and try to kill one of my players. That was the creature's intent. Um, and it basically one shot unconscious one of the strongest players, kind of this like righteous glory um paladin. And for the rest of the night, there were some other pretty dark-ish things that happened. So there were a lot of downward beats, and it was a tough session. And at the very end of it, the paladin basically went silent after being dropped twice and seeing one of my other players' characters' moms was killed in front of him as well. So two really big hard things, one after the other. It was a lot of downward beats, um, which I'm learning from. But what I'm saying as well is at the very end, they found a room to rent outside the inn, and they ended up going in and just kind of going to their own spaces, and they buried, well, they sent like a Viking funeral essentially for the mom that died, and essentially, at the very end, a stranger knocks on their door, and in the inn that they're staying in, or in the side house, and a stranger knocks on their door, and it knew the player character who was playing the paladin's name. The thing, it was a woman that was knocking outside, and she said like Sigmund, said his name, and I asked Jameson what Sigmund would do. And Jameson's like, Sigmund's going to leave out the back door and run away. And I thought that was a very, very kind of authentic response, and a very, like, we found out right then like how much Sigmund, like, there is Sigmund can fear, right? Like Sigmund is not, um even though he professes like a holy lifestyle, um there's a deep rooted fear in there that there is a certain amount of wickedness or evil in the world that could scare Sigmund. And maybe that's not even it. Maybe it's the fact that he feels powerless in a world like, I don't know. So this is what I was thinking about, is fear. And in D&D, one thing I've never really thought about is, what do my characters fear? As a DM, I don't really think like what would scare my characters. If the players were to do something to try to strike fear, because a lot of times it's just like, well, roll an intimidation check, and they're like, oh, they look frightened, they'll tell you something. Roll some check, and that's how you, which I don't think is a bad system. But if the characters ever like even something as simple as this, I know you don't want to overcomplicate like NPCs. I think there's a million ways to do NPCs, and I don't think any of them is the right way, but it's just what works for you. So one thing I'm going to try, and I'm interested to see how it goes, is so the player that just like the creature that tried to kill Sigmund, what does that creature fear? It's this evil, dark, shadowy thing, and you just think like, oh, evil things they're not afraid. They don't feel fear. They're evil. They are fear. But that's coming from a skewed perspective. If evil things have just as much of a reason to fear as good things do. And what is it that causes those things fear? Is it loss of power? Is it, do they fear that they can't be saved? Or do they fear, maybe they fear something even more evil than them, right? Like maybe they fear something that's even worse, so they have to do something. They have to do these evil things because if they didn't, the only way they could survive, I mean, they wouldn't survive if they didn't do these things. If they didn't follow this overly evil overlord, then they would be killed or something much worse than that. So, and if a player ever did something that could remind one of these NPCs about what they fear, or if they did something directly tied to their fear, what would the response of that NPC be? So if this assassin saw something that terrified them, would they run away? Would they just would they freeze? Would they flight? Would they fight? Would they basically not be able to accept this because it is so against everything they believe, their whole identity? If something so holy and righteous showed up, would their response be to fight that because it makes them angry? And this is the point that I kind of want to get to is I was reading A Wrinkle in Time, and the line that keeps standing out to me that I keep thinking about is the main character is going into an unknown situation and is asked if she's afraid. And she responds that she is afraid. And the response she gets back from Mrs. Who's It and What's It, and it's the first time I've read it. I don't remember all their names. But when she when the main character tells that to these beings, the response is essentially actually, I want to quote it because I want to be right. Okay, I know where it is now. Okay. Okay, so in A Wrinkle in Time, they've just discovered that dark black thing, and they found out their father is trapped in there. So after they see this, they're with all three: Mrs. Witch, Mrs. What's It, and I don't remember her name, but we'll find it. And Mrs. Witch says, "Now, children, you must not be frightened at what is going to happen," Mrs. Witch warned. "Stay angry, little Meg," Mrs. What's-It whispered. "You will need all your anger now." So, it talks about fear and immediately saying and then it gives the advice, stay angry, little Meg. Anger is, I don't know, somehow super closely related or a counter to fear. If you feel fear, then anger will help counteract that, which I thought was amazing. So then they travel, and the next thing that happens is I've always thought of anger as being a fault, and I have a really bad relationship with anger. I view anger as 0 to 100. There's no gray areas for anger for me. So the next time that the conversation continues on, and she's giving talismans. Mrs. Whatsit is giving talismans to each of the children. She says, "You will need help," she told them, "but I am allowed to give you a little talisman. Calvin, your great gift is your ability to communicate with all kinds of people. So for you, I will strengthen this gift." And then she says, "Meg, I give you your faults." "My faults?" Meg cried. "Your faults." "But I'm always trying to get rid of my faults." "Yes," Mrs. Whatsit said. "However, I think you'll find they come in very handy on Camazotz." And then she talks to Charles Wallace after that. So if I view one of Meg's weaknesses as being anger, that it's said here like that it can be a strength, and that makes sense because anger is a natural human emotion. It's not wrong to be angry. It's not just because if you're having a conversation with somebody and you're angry and they're not, it doesn't make you wrong. Like people say like, "Oh, you need to calm down," and like all these things. And it's not true. Like we need to be more accepting of anger. So when I feel angry within myself, I want it to go away. I don't want it to be there anymore. I I hate feeling it, and I realize one of the reasons I feel anger is because I'm afraid. And I have that fear, and when I'm angry, that's my response to fear. Is I get angry. And it happens like when there's too many things going on, when I overbook myself, when I am not cleaning up, I I think I feel a fear that my life is falling apart. I can't take care of myself. Or I fear, if finances are tight, I fear I'm not going to be able to afford my mortgage. I'm not going to be able to, take care of my family, take care of my three dogs and Sarah. And those are the things that I fear so deeply. And I respond with anger a lot of times when those things are challenged. So I think helping me when I'm at least being more aware of my anger and trying to understand it rather than fight it and judge it, I feel more kind towards my own anger. I feel like I don't have to fight it anymore. So later on, they are talking and they go down to Camazotz and they're with the three misses and they are just about to depart from our three main characters. And Charles Wallace leads up into Mrs. Whatsit and says, "Now I think I know what you meant about being afraid." "Only a fool is not afraid," Mrs. Whatsit told him. "Now go." And then, where she had been there, were only sky and grasses and a small rock. So, it just, that really drives home the fact to me that, only a fool is not afraid. So, with fear, it's not even trying to reduce being afraid. It's not trying to fight against our fears and not be afraid anymore. Because just like anger is a natural human emotion, fear is also a natural human emotion. And we need to make friends with our fear and accept it. And when I say we, I mean myself. I need to, when I feel that fear that I'm not going to be able to afford to stay in a house. I'm not going to be able to, take care of my life. Things might fall apart. I need to recognize that I can't just distract myself from those fears. I need to accept them and welcome them when they come and learn to sit with them and have a real conversation where we're figuring out how we can work together, how we can make this life work together. So my closing thoughts essentially are, even when you think about it in D&D, our characters don't. Our characters are eccentric fanatics. They don't need to. They either fight their fears or they run from them. And you hear fight, flight, or freeze. And I think I'd like to add just one thing, and that is accepting that we're afraid, and it's okay to be afraid sometimes.